Thank you for joining the City of Kingston's Common Council at our Laws and Rules meeting. Today is Wednesday, June 17th. My name is Andrea Schott, the Council President and Organizer for our virtual meetings. Before we begin, we would like to go over a few guidelines to help us navigate the system as efficiently and respectfully as possible. We ask that members of the public and press remain muted and off camera for the length of the meeting. As organizer, I reserve the right to mute anyone who unmutes themselves. Council members, city staff, and guests will control their own mute button. Good practice would be to mute yourself if you are not speaking to avoid background noise and feedback. If a council member or staff wishes to speak, they will raise their hands. The chairperson will call on them before they speak by stating their name clearly for our audio listeners. All of our meetings are recorded. Both video and written transcriptions will be made available to the public on the city's website. Although we will not have public speaking tonight, you could submit written comments to the City of Kingston Clerk, Elisa Tinty, at emtinty@kingston-ny.gov or by dropping them off at the drop box located outside the side door of City Hall. We also encourage you to reach out to committee chairs or your board representative at any time. If you have any audio issues, send a text message to the following number, 845-594-6120. Please be aware that phone calls will not be answered during the meeting. The number to text is 845-594-6120. As the organizer for today's meeting, I reserve the right to lock and pause the meeting to eject anyone who has behaved inappropriately. Lastly, at tonight's meeting, we have in attendance the chair, Alderman Jeffrey Ventura Morel, committee members, Alderwoman Rita Worthington, Alderman Patrick O'Reilly, Alderman Don Tollerman, Alderman Rennie Scott Childress, non-voting council members, Alderwoman Michelle Hirsch. City staff, Corp Counsel Dan Gardenstein, City Clerk Elisa Tinty, and Kevin Bryant. Thank you for your patience during these difficult times, and on behalf of the Common Council, I wish you and your family good health. I now turn the floor over to Chairman Ventura Morel.
Good evening. It's 6:33. Yes, Andre?
Sorry, I forgot I was going to go over the agenda, which we normally don't do, so I went on autopilot here. The chairman asked me to go over the agenda because we were moving a couple items around just to help our guests out here. So for the listeners, just so you're aware, because tonight's going to be a pretty hefty meeting. There's a couple changes from what was on the city website. We're going to start with Charter Commission, and then we'll move on to Development of Workforce Housing at Golden Hill, Tree Commission membership. The fourth is Open Space Plan. Next would be the towing fees. The sixth item would be building zoning laws. The seventh, commercial vacancy tax. The eighth item, mobile food truck legislation. And the ninth and final item, police commission legislation. So if you want to leave, if you're here for one of the later ones, if you want to leave, we'll be here for the Charter Commission for a good portion of the beginning of the meeting, and you could always re-enter. Thank you.
Thank you, President Schott. This is Alderman Jeffrey Ventura Morel. It's 6:34, and I will call this meeting to order. The first order of business, we have a special guest from NICOM, Wade Beltramo. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And he will give us a presentation about the process of charter revision. Is there anything you'd like to add, President Schott?
No.
Okay, so I will let Wade take it from here.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks for having me. I have a PowerPoint, and I'm going to share my screen here. So, for those, and I will be able to, I'll provide this, and you can share it with everybody else later on. There's not a lot to it. The PowerPoint is basically kind of just a talking outline of the things I want to cover. But I do first want to, again, thank you for having me and give a little bit of a background about who I am and what my organization is and why I'm here. I am general counsel for the New York State Conference of Mayors. We are a not-for-profit membership organization that represents the state's city and village governments, which are generally the mayoral form of governments that represent densely populated areas. They generally provide a higher number of services, more intensive services. We represent the more urban built-up areas of the state as opposed to rural towns. So we provide a variety of services, technical assistance on a daily basis. Many of our members, including representatives from the city of Kingston, call us if they have a question about a law or an issue. We're pretty busy these days. It's a busy time. We also do a plethora of training at conferences, workshops, online webinars. We're doing a lot of that, obviously, these days. We produce a variety of publications, including the handbook for city officials. And I'm going to be talking about charter revision specifically here, and hopefully I'll answer any questions, and we can, just as soon answer the questions that any of the members of this committee have, as opposed to going on in my presentation. But in that handbook, we do have an overview of what the charter revision process is. So that's kind of what I do in a nutshell. We also do, I should say, some legislative advocacy or lobbying. So we lobby on behalf of the cities and villages and their taxpayers before the state legislature, and we do some amicus work. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I do want to, and I think it's helpful to understand the charter revision process to get a little bit of a background about how New York State's local governments are organized. And we do have four different types of local governments in the state: counties, and then three types of general purpose local government entities: cities, villages, and towns. And all of the cities operate under their own charter. So there are 62 cities in the state of New York, the original cities being given charters from the King of England, and that was New York City and Albany way back when. Actually, villages originally were formed and operated under charters as well. We still have 12 charter villages of the 533 villages in the state that operate under their own charter. Otherwise, all of the other villages operate under the New York State village law. And then there are 933 towns, and they operate under the New York State town law. Again, we represent cities and villages. Villages are actually, the way I refer to them, forget the name village, they're New York's incorporated form of city government as opposed to a charter government. That's basically kind of the best way to think of cities and villages. They really do basically the same things. And whether or not you're a city or charter is not dependent upon your size. Some people think that. The difference between a city and village is how big it is. We actually have many villages that are larger than many of the cities. So we just put that out there. Regarding the cities, and this is just for you all to a little bit of a background, all the cities operate pursuant to their charters. There are kind of four basic structures for city government in the state. Strong mayor, which is, I think, what most people associate with city government. They think of a city, they think of a mayor, they think of a strong mayor, a la the city of New York or the city of Los Angeles, as the case may be. And that is the most prevalent form of city government, is actually the form how villages are structured. Villages are basically a strong mayor form of government in that respect. The second most common type of city government in New York State is the city manager government. And without going into too much detail, they generally always have a mayor as well, but the mayor in those city manager forms of government is generally more ceremonial. The mayor may sit or be a member of the city council and potentially the presiding officer of the city council, but the manager is a higher professional. The manager is a hired professional that is the chief executive officer. The other two forms, weak mayor and commission form, I'm not going to really go into them. They do exist. The commission form is a kind of a unique leftover, I would say, from how many New England local governments were formed where you would elect a different person to run a different department. So like a finance person and a police commissioner and a DPW commissioner, and then they would sit collectively as the legislative body. We have 2 of those in New York, Saratoga Springs and Mechanicville. But that's in a nutshell. What structure your city is governed by your charter. That's what you have to look to. That's what controls government operations. And so the city charter is very, very important. Having said that, the charter, just as a general rule, should not be an exhaustive document. It shouldn't attempt to address every possible scenario that you might think of. You can get charters that are too burdensome and clunky in that respect. However, you need to make sure they address every scenario that you might encounter. And we do come across city charters periodically that have a structure that creates a system, say, for example, in the budget process, that doesn't have a procedure for what happens if the city council doesn't adopt a budget. What do you do then? And there have been city charters that didn't address that scenario, and the city council doesn't adopt a budget. That's someplace you don't want to be. So that's a little bit of a challenge. But there's no one size fits all with the charters, but you do want to make sure that they're kind of comprehensive and yet flexible. The law governing, and I should say, and I don't know how you normally handle questions. I mean, if any of the members have a question, by all means, feel free to chime in. But the law governing the charter process, and stepping back further, the charters are all granted by the state. A lot of people don't even understand how do you become a city in the state of New York? Well, you become a city in the state of New York by going with your hat in your hand to the state legislature, and you say, "Please, sir, may I become a city?" And the legislature, if they are feeling generous, they will give you a city charter. The last city charter to be granted by the state legislature was in 1942 when the village of Rye became the city of Rye down in Westchester County. That's not for lack of trying. There are many communities that have tried to become cities, that have wanted to become cities. The village of Newark in the town of Arcade out in Western New York was the last to get the closest. It passed the legislature, but was vetoed by Governor Cuomo back in the early 90s. So that's how you get a charter. Once you have a charter, it's really up to the local government to revise it as necessary. I mean, there is a potential that you could go and ask the state legislature to amend your charter, but I'm not aware, frankly, of anybody doing that. Generally, if they need to make a charter revision, they just do it themselves, following the process and procedure that's set forth in Municipal Home Rule Law, Section 36. And there are a couple of different ways that the charters can be amended. One is simply to have the city council adopt a law amending the charter. And that may or may not be subject to a referendum. The actions that trigger referenda are set forth throughout state law. The primary sections of state law that trigger a referenda are sections 23 and 24 of the Municipal Home Rule Law. And there's certain things. So like if you transfer power from one elected official to another elected official, that would trigger a referendum. There are a whole slew of things. I'm not going to go through the list, but that you could have technically an amendment to the city charter that wouldn't necessarily have to be put to a vote of the city residents, again, unless it triggered one of those threshold requirements. The other way to go about this is to establish a charter revision commission. And this is done relatively frequently. Saratoga Springs has gone through this a couple of times over the last 15, 20 years. They actually have in their charter a requirement that they have to review the charter I want to say it's once every 10 years. So they do that whether or not they want to. It's in the charter. But other communities will, cities have gone through the Charter Revision Commission process, sometimes to establish the manager. We've seen a few look at that. Sometimes just to, look at it and see what needs to be changed. Are things working well? Are they not working well? Do we want to transfer power from one a public official to another public official? We want to restructure our local government. And one of the things I recommend, and I don't have it in the slideshow, is that every local government should have a copy of its organizational chart. And for cities, the city's organizational chart is going to be determined by your charter. And I think it helps to graphically represent who has what power, how are things laid out, who's subordinate to what in the chain, who's subordinate to whom in the chain of command. So it's helpful to have that. But sometimes that's what you're looking to do as part of the process. And sometimes there's a feeling that, hey, we need to change things, partly because, things aren't working as well as we'd like. Maybe we'd like more power given to the residents, as the case may be. We want to set up some community boards or something of that nature. Maybe the legislative body wants some power that is currently residing with the mayor, or who knows what. That would be an opportunity to set up the Charter Commission. I'll talk a little bit about the makeup of the Charter Commission in a second. There are 3 ways to establish a Charter Commission. One is by the local legislative body, the city council, actually doing that. Another is by citizen petition. So you could have residents of the city of Kingston go around and circulate a petition requesting that a charter commission be formed. And the third is that the mayor, him or herself, can actually initiate the charter revision process by establishing a commission. There's not real pros and cons necessarily for any of those ways. It's just, how it gets set up. There are some potential pitfalls. I don't want to say pitfall. There you can have or end up with competing charter commissions, because you can have one that's established by a petition and then one by the mayor, and there are some issues with that. I'm not going to really cover that this evening. If that happens to you, give me a call back and I can help you walk you through the process and procedure. A little bit about the Charter Commission itself. The members may not be compensated. That's actually in Section 36, so you don't pay them. They don't draw a salary or anything of that nature, but they can be reimbursed for their expenses. So, any travel expenses or anything like that, if they have any out-of-pocket expenses, that would be something that they could be compensated for. The commission can appoint and remove employees and fix their compensation. Now, this can be an issue because, of course, what does this mean? Generally, there needs to be a negotiation because the commission itself doesn't have any monies to draw on. And there have been situations where basically the city council has strangled a charter commission because they haven't provided it with any resources, and they've gone to court over that. To give this provision actual meaning, if a commission is formed, this isn't in the statute, but this is the advice I give, is that the city council must provide reasonable funding for the commission to complete its functions and duties. So, they need to have adequate facilities. They should be provided adequate support from the city. And that, again, is a little bit of a negotiation. This should be done at the beginning of the process. Like, the commission should come up with a budget, but it also can be revised as you go forward. And so that, again, is an ongoing negotiation between the commission and the city council. It's not something that should be overlooked, frankly. I think it's something that should be addressed from the beginning. Yeah, Andrea.
Is there a general price range that these typically cost, or is it really depending on too many variables?
That's a good question. I mean, generally, you're not talking about a lot of money, a few $1,000s, depending on how long it goes and what they look at. Do they hire a consultant? are they looking at doing, what are they really looking to modify? So, for example, if you're looking to make some significant structural changes to shift from for example, in Saratoga's case, from a commission form of government to a manager form of government, what did that actually mean fiscally? Like, they had some smart people on that commission, but that was a major change. What was that going to mean for the budget? And if you're going to hire a consultant to really dig into that, that could be tens of thousands of dollars. Generally, you're not looking at more than that. However, I mean, it's really, for the most part, a few $1,000s to some tens of thousands of dollars. But again, it's what are you looking to do, and how much information do you want to have as a result of that? Because, the bigger revision that you do, of course, a lot of people are going to have a lot of questions. And if the commission really wants to flesh out the issues, obviously they're going to want to study it more. They're going to want to go and, consult with people more. They may want to take a trip to another municipality that they're modeling their change on. And of course, those expenses should be baked into the cost. I mean, that shouldn't be something that the commission members pay for out of pocket. If you're not doing that, obviously the expenses are going to be not as much. So.
Thank you.
There is a process, and I bring this up because it can happen if the appropriating body does not provide the money within 45 days. The mayor may authorize the commission to incur the expense, but then you still have the issue of appropriation. If you have becomes an issue, it does every once in a while, particularly if the process is not something where everybody is on board with, and we do end up with situations where the mayor is for a revision, looking at revising the commission, but the council is not, or vice versa. Or it's something that the residents are pushing, but neither the mayor nor the council are supportive of. So if you have these elected officials who aren't supportive of this process, it can become problematic in that respect. The commission members, they serve terms of office in a little bit different way than local officials serve their terms. Normally, local officials' terms coincide with the official year of the municipality, but the commission members' terms last from when they are appointed until the election day at which the proposal is submitted to the public for a vote. And I should note that, we had the first situation where it is possible for the city council to revise the commission without necessarily being put to a vote of the residents. But if you have a commission that is created, that is going to be put to a vote of the residents, unless the city legislature, unless the council decides itself to adopt their recommendations, in which case it would make a vote by the residents kind of moot in that respect. Again, also assuming that it's not something that's subject to a referendum requirement under Section 23 or 24 of the Municipal Home Rule Law. The commissions, and this is something that is maybe what you would look at. There's nothing to prevent the local legislative body, the city council, from conducting its own series of public hearings. The commission can do this too, as it deems or necessary or sees fit. It's really on a variety of things. They can do it to bring in experts to talk about it. They can have public hearings to allow the public to come in and talk about it. There's a lot of flexibility about what the commission does as far as fact gathering and information gathering and determining what, if any, changes should be made to the city's charter. They have a lot of authority to conduct private hearings, not public hearings. So that's one exception that's expressly in the statute, which is a little different than what you would normally be subject to under the state's open meetings law. They can take testimony. They have the subpoena power. That's generally not something that they would need or want to use per se. The procedure, once they decide what they want to do, if a charter commission is formed, in theory, they could recommend nothing. They don't necessarily per se have to form or make any recommendation, they could come back and say, hey, we are recommending not to do anything. However, if they are going to submit a request, it must be done, and the phrasing here in Section 36 can be a little bit confusing. It must be completed and filed with the city clerk in time to be voted on, not later than the second general election after when the Charter Commission was created. And so this can create different timeframes for when you have a Charter Commission, because, so for example, your general election is the first Tuesday after the first Monday of the month under New York State law. If a Charter Commission is formed in December, it could go almost 2 full years in existence carrying out its work. However, if a Charter Commission is formed, in October, then it would, not have, it would have just a little bit more than a year, and actually less than that, because it needs to be completed before it's put on the ballot. So you can see there the timing can really vary on how long a Charter Commission exists or how much time it has to do its work pursuant to Section 36 of the Municipal Home Rule Law. When it submits its proposal, it would be submitted at a general or a special election to be held not more than 60 days after being filed with the clerk. And so the timing of the completion and filing of its recommendation and proposed revision will determine whether or not it is put on the ballot in November, or whether it is put on the ballot at some other time for the city residents to vote on. I'd say there's pros and cons to both things. If you have it on the ballot in November, generally you're going to have more people voting on it, and we like people to vote on our things, open to the public. At the same time, you may get people voting on your charter revision that are not, if it's on the November ballot, that they didn't even realize there was a charter revision, right? They come to vote every November. They were there to vote for the president or the governor or whatever election, and next thing you know, they're voting on the charter. And so there's pros and cons to doing it that way. I don't think it's necessarily a huge issue, but it is a topic of conversation that people have when determining whether or not to put a charter revision vote on the November ballot or in a special election some other time. If, however, the general election occurs between 60 and 90 days after the proposal is filed, it must be put on the general election ballot. So here's an example that I've used in the past. If your election day, for example, was on November 8th back in 2016, if it were to fall between September 9th or be filed with the city clerk between September 9th and August 10th of that year, it would have to, by law, be put on the general election ballot. So that's, again, just another consideration. Some practical revision considerations, and I didn't even touch.
Wait, I'm sorry, but can I jump in?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, sorry, I didn't know if you could see me on the screen. When it goes to referendum and goes to the ballot, does it all have to be like you have to take everything as an all or nothing, or can it be segmented parts of the charter revision that came from the commission?
So that's a great question. Generally, when you have it, the charter it needs to cover like one issue. The process can get a little bit confusing if you put multiple issues on the charter, right? So you're like, oh, A, B, or C, how would you do that? We don't really have rank choice voting. You can have multiple proposals on the ballot, so it can be broken out. It doesn't have to be all one. But you want to make sure that there aren't charter provisions that have potential inconsistencies within them, right? So if you were asking people to vote on two different charter provisions, charter revisions that were potentially inconsistent or in conflict, that would be problematic in that respect. So it can be submitted in parts so that the existing charter provisions it's not a complete revision and you're just amending part of it and submitting those in pieces, because not every potential charter revision provision would necessarily impact one another. I mean, you could creating something or doing something in one part of the charter would not necessarily impact other parts, and you could then, in theory, have a multiple questions on the ballot. But you need to be careful about doing that because it can cause confusion. Is there a specific example or something that you're thinking about that you would want to?
No, I've just heard that other municipalities, if there's like a certain item that's more of a controversial item, that could perhaps, if it's on there, kill the whole charter reform. So I've heard that has been segmented out just so that it doesn't kill everything else.
Yeah, I mean, the commission may submit alternative charters or amendments, but you have to be careful about doing that. It really depends on the circumstances. So it's not a bright line. Yes, it can be done, or no, it can't be done. It really depends on what you're doing. And of course, then therein lies a challenge, because you take all this time to put this together, and it takes a long time to do this. You want to do it right, and you can. It's not that you don't only get one bite of the apple. You can do it again, but the process does take a while. And so, to the extent if you spend 12, 24 months or so in the charter revision process and you vote it down, but you think, oh, well, we still want to do something, and you want to come back around and submit that again, that's a challenge. We don't really have either or provisions, right? I mean, that's the other problem as well. It's not as if, and so that's I think an example. If you're asking, we're going to say we're either going to do A or B, that type of a charter revision question wouldn't be allowed, because you're not leaving them with the opportunity to not do anything. Right. I mean, one of the potential votes or outcomes of a charter revision vote for the public has to be to stick with the charter that you have now. Simply creating a commission does not mean that you have to change your charter.
All right. Thank you.
So regarding some of the practical charter revision considerations, I mean, the first thing is citizen participation and education of the public. Those go hand in hand all along. And by that, I mean, starting at the beginning, why are you doing this process? Educating the public. Why are we looking into this? Getting the citizen participation, getting them involved all along the way. And it is, for the local officials on here, I know it can be a challenge getting the public engaged in many instances, but you don't want to wait until 2 months or 3 months before the election, when all the work has been done and the charter has been filed with the clerk and the ballots are being prepared, to really publicize this, because as you know, the public will sit up at that point and start paying attention when they weren't involved or engaged for the previous 24 months or so. And all of a sudden say, what are you doing? Why are you trying to do this? What are you trying to, and you might have had, 40 public hearings and opportunities for the public to come and speak and submit comment. But you really need to be active in dragging the public to these meetings, because otherwise what we see frequently is people who were not paying attention, despite all the notices that you put out, despite the articles in the local newspaper and on the radio and television, people will come and say, what are you trying to put over on us? Why are you just trying to shove this down our throats, even though you had, again, 40 public comment periods? So it's a matter of really reaching out to the public, doing your public hearings, maybe out in the neighborhoods, doing one-on-one contact, inviting people to come in personally, not just, hey, we've got a public comment period. It is so important to engage in those in the community as a whole, but again, those stakeholders who, in your community are going to be involved at the very end. You want them to be involved at the very beginning as well. I would say this also, editorial support for the local newspapers, if you can, and, getting those newspapers, educating them, not, again, this is the editorial support. It's also about engaging the reporters who are going to be covering this and making sure those reporters are knowledgeable about the process and what you're doing and why you're doing it so they can report accurately, but also from the editorial side, educating those individuals or those entities so that, they're coming out, informed and making an informed opinion about what you're doing. And then also endorsement of the local municipal officials. So, one of the things that we see, and there are pros and cons with using the charter commission process as opposed to having the city council, do the charter revision via local law. But one of the cons is, you don't necessarily have the support per se of the local municipal officials. And that does bring some independence to the process, which I think can be good, particularly if you have distrust of your, local legislative members. We see this like, oh, you can't trust these elected officials. They're just in it for the money, and they're just protecting their own self-interest. And so the commission will allow kind of like that arm's length transaction to occur where that public body, which is, they're not paid. They're not elected officials. They're not going to have jobs necessarily in the city after the commission is finished with its work to put this together. But you need to get the local officials on board to the extent you can as well. It's one of my recommendations. That's for the charter commission process. Yes, Andrea.
I'm just going to go back one step because I loved everything you're talking about with public education. I'm actually an educator myself, and a few of the council members are also educators. Do you have any examples, or maybe it's not, you don't have to answer this right now. Maybe if you could reach out with some examples of some other municipalities around the same size, we're about 23,000, that what they have done for public outreach. It's something that I've said from the beginning of doing this that we want to do, and I think the council members are supportive of that. So if you have any suggestions, or it may be too big of a question to answer tonight, but maybe if you
and I can definitely put you in contact. I think you should, a couple of the cities that have done recent charter amendments, and I can send the contact information. I would highly recommend that you reach out for them just to see what their experience has been. It's good to talk to somebody who's been through it recently. I've advised many cities, but I have not. I preface this. I'm general counsel for the Conference of Mayors. We're a not-for-profit association. I'm sitting here in Albany. I didn't shepherd the process through the entire way with those cities. So Saratoga Springs, again, has gone through it a couple of times. I would definitely reach out to them. I thought they did a good job. I think, what you need to or should do really depends on what you're looking to do with the charter revision. The bigger the lift, obviously, the bigger the change it's going to be for the city and the stakeholders and the residents. Obviously, the more work you want to do to get people over and involved from the very beginning. So, for example, in the city of Saratoga Springs case, they had a ton of hearings. And they knew who people, the interested individuals were. I'm not sure, their charter revision, actually, it was voted down. I hesitate to really opine as to why ultimately it was voted down. I mean, they were substantially changing their structure of government from a commission form to a manager form. That was the proposal. And so, that's a a big thing to do. And I think that was a massive change that a lot of people were uncomfortable with. And so one of the things, I think this is an aside, when we see changes like that, and we've seen it also in the area of village dissolution, when you're talking about, let's just get rid of our government, that's a big change. If you're getting something that large, what you may want to consider is, if it's so big, and how confident do we feel in the public being comfortable with making that change and approving that change? If you don't feel confident with that, then perhaps you should step back, because no matter how much effort you put into engaging the public, I'm not sure. You have to be really good at doing that. And I mean really good at engaging citizen participation. You need to spend a lot of time and effort, which frankly most people don't have, because this is a part-time job that many people will do on top of their full-time jobs over the course of several months. And they just don't have the energy or the resources to do that. You might want to step back and consider, well, we have a long-term goal of doing a massive change to how we want to restructure our government. Maybe we break it off into pieces. Maybe instead of changing from a commission form of government, we go to something slightly different, and work our way to a manager form of government. That's one option or possibility. Another community, City of Oneonta, which was not as big of a change, they actually approved the manager form of government. It's maybe 8 years ago now, maybe a decade. Time flies. And that wasn't as big of a change, because switching from a strong mayor to a manager, not that big of a change. They did it. But they had a lot of community, design charrette kind of activities, public hearings. They brought in outside speakers. They held the presentations at different locations. They engaged other groups to kind of facilitate the dialogue sometimes, and maybe present the question differently. If you do have, and that would be something I would definitely recommend, depending on what the issue is. And I'm not sure what you all are looking, what issues you're looking to address. If there are specific interest groups that would have some expertise or a say in what you're looking to do, I would say engage them. Give them an opportunity to come and present. Give them an opportunity, or ask them, hey, are you interested in holding or hosting a roundtable at your location, and kind of facilitating a dialogue on certain issues. I think there are different ways to kind of engage the public and educate the public. But again, it's not just education, getting them involved, getting them to come and participate in the process, I think is very, very important. Are there any questions? I didn't cover all the nitty-gritty of the charter revision process. So if you should really look at in our handbook for city officials, we have a chapter that goes over the process. There's also, I should say, and I didn't cover this, I mean, it is an option for residents, for citizens themselves, to actually draft a proposed charter revision, circulate it via petition, get enough signatures to submit it to a vote. And that has been tried. Actually, it happened up in Saratoga Springs about 15 years ago, where there were some issues, and the citizens circulated a petition. That's a lot of work. It is not as common for that to happen. And so I don't, you need some really active or engaged citizens to do that, because they've got to draft a charter provision, the actual charter changes that they want. They've got to put that as part of the petition. They have to circulate that petition. The petition needs to contain at least 10% signatures equal to at least 10% of the votes cast for governor in the city at the last gubernatorial election, or 30,000, which is ever less. So it can be done, but that's not what's being envisioned in your community. I'm assuming no. Any other questions, or everybody has charter revision fever?
any of the council members, and we actually do have the mayor here to, if anybody has any questions, I'll let Jeffrey take over, and if anybody wants to ask, just raise your hand.
Go ahead.
Rennie Scott Childress.
That was a lot to take in. I really appreciate your presentation, and I look forward to thinking about this more deeply. And I hope that we'll be able to be in touch as we have more questions, because as you know, it's one thing to talk about it abstractly. It's another thing when you start to try to actually put things into motion.
Absolutely. So I start off by saying one of the services we provide is technical assistance. And by that, I mean, any of you members of the city council can call or email NICOM anytime and ask us a question. You can access our members only section where we have our publications, including the handbook for city officials. So if you don't have that, actually, I'll email it to Andrea and she can circulate it among you all. And in there, we have a chapter that discusses, we have a couple chapters, one that kind of discusses the modern charter in general, but another that actually goes into the nuts and bolts and the more detailed process. If you're having trouble sleeping tonight, you can just turn to that charter revision provision. It's better than any other sleep aid. So, but yes, absolutely. Don't hesitate to call them, email any city official or employee. That's what we're here for. That's what we do.
Any other questions? Yes, Alderwoman Michelle Hirsch.
Hi, this is Alderwoman Hirsch. Your presentation. Just curious to know the average amount of time from once establishing a commission to getting a referendum for vote.
You know, I mean, you're stuck with the time frame if you're following the commission form there. I should also say, you know, the Section 36 has its formal process for establishing a commission. There's nothing to stop a city council itself or even the mayor from saying, hey, we want to just study revising our charter without forming a commission. And in that instance, you're not bound by any kind of time frame. Okay. But if you're following the commission model, like if you're forming the commission, either the legislative body or a petition or the mayor, once you get into that timing, it's got to be done. They're under the time frame to complete their work. You know, not later than the second election. How long it takes them really depends on what they're looking at. Some of the charter, I mean, I would say the vast majority of charter revisions are not that extensive in this day and age. I mean, you're looking even of City of Oneonta's, you know, it was a little bit extensive because you were not all the powers, but a substantial percentage or number of the powers that the mayor had, you were going to transfer those over to the manager, right? You're going to create this, transfer the chief executive officer powers from the mayor to the manager. So you got to go through the charter, make sure you're looking and seeing every place where there's a role or responsibility for the mayor that you want to give to the manager, that you address that in the revision. That's not that much work. And it could be done relatively quickly. It depends on how controversial the issue is. So obviously, if you're talking about doing something that's, you know, not everybody's on board with, you know, that can be more work for the commission to come up with a proposal that they think reflects what the public wants and that would also get passed. I mean, you will see that the commissions will have that discussion. Well, we think this is the ideal form. We think this is what we should do, this proposal A, but is the public going to propose? Is the public going to vote for proposal A? And so then they may engage in a little bit of a process of trying to figure out what actually can get past the voters. I don't think get approved by the voters, because it's, you know, putting anything past the voters, they have to approve it. So, you know, it really depends on those variety of factors. If it's not controversial, if it's relatively straightforward, if everybody's on board, maybe you were looking at this for a long time and you've already done some studying in it. It might not take very long at all. It really depends on what the issue is.
Thank you.
Your charter covers a lot of stuff, right? Everybody's read the charter, and it covers a lot of things from financing to structure, and streets and sidewalks and water and sewers. There's a lot of things that are in your charter. You're not necessarily revising everything, although you could get rid of the whole thing and start from scratch.
Well, that sounds like fun.
I do think, sorry, Jeffrey, real quick. I think it's one of the things, there is a tendency at all levels of government, state, federal, and local, just to continue doing what's always been done. Again, nobody is immune from that. And people get in, they're becoming a new elected official. I don't know how many people are newly elected on the city council here, is drinking from the proverbial fire hose, as you all know, right? Did you know what you were getting into when you got elected? And so I think one of the challenges is that many people will get in, and part of the first process is just understanding the structure of government and how it works. And then you're like, at the same time, you're trying to do business. You're adopting the budget, and you're managing a workforce, and you're responding to citizen complaints. And you don't have time necessarily to sit back after a while, after you've gotten some experience, to look at it and say, hey, is this how we want it to be? Is this the way that we would want our city structured and running? Do we want to make some changes? And I encourage everybody, whether or not you form a charter commission, to think about that on a regular basis. Is what we're doing, is how we're doing it, is it effective? Is it a good use of taxpayer monies? Does it represent our constituents well? I think we see a little bit of that. The discussion right now, if you've been watching the governor's press conferences and the issues with the criminal justice reform and reform of the police departments, the comment about, and he made it today, was, when was the last time we actually looked at, our how we use police? And I will tell you, we at the Conference of Mayors have been advising our members for a long time. We're trying to use our criminal justice system for to deal with social service issues. Well, why are we doing that? That doesn't make sense. But that's what we end up doing, because that's a system we have, and we haven't really examined it in that way. And so I think you can think about, take that example and apply it to local government generally. That's something that I encourage everybody to do. Review your systems. Are they achieving your goals? Are they doing it in a way that's cost effective?
Oh, sorry. I'll ask a quick question, and then Michelle Hirsch. Our charter hasn't been updated in a very long time. I think it's about 20-something years, if I'm not mistaken. How often does the average, or 30-something years actually, how often does the average city revise their charter?
Not frequently. And so I just said you should look at your charter and your structure and is it working, but that doesn't necessarily mean, if it's working for you, that doesn't mean you should just change it for just to change it. City charters, one of the challenges, so all except for the 12 charter villages operate under the in the New York State Village Law. They're incorporated under that law. And one of the benefits of that is that because we have 521 villages operating under that law, there is some case law that interprets the provisions of the village law. What does it mean? There are state agency opinions that interpret what those provisions of the New York State Village Law means. Every time you amend your city charter, you have the potential to create problems where people don't necessarily, like, you have to go back through and what did we create here? What does this process mean? We thought we did a good job of addressing everything in the charter revision process, but we use this term, and now we have a question of law about what that term actually means. How does it work? And that can be a problem. That's a huge challenge for cities, because we have every city with a different charter there's not a lot of case law. There aren't a lot of opportunities for interpreting and understanding what the charter provisions actually mean. So I that's just a little bit of a caveat there, but it's not a lot. I shouldn't say it's never. Charters do get amended for a variety of reasons. I don't have an exact number. I can take a look at that and see if we have any recent information data, and I can email that to you. It's not as if every year, cities are revising their charters on an annual basis. We probably have a couple of charter questions that are put to the public. You also have charter revisions, again, that are done that are not subject to referendum. So you might have a city that simply adopts a local law, and all they have to do to make that effective is follow the procedure that's outlined in the municipal home rule law, specifically Section 20, of introducing it, aging it, have a public hearing, and then having a majority vote of the city council vote on it. It may or may not be subject to mayoral veto. And then filing it with the Secretary of State's office. So those types of charter revisions can occur as well. That's not, again, the charter revision process. Those are generally relatively minor amendments that are made that are in the charter.
Thank you. Alderwoman Hirsch, go ahead.
Hi, Alderwoman Hirsch here again. So I guess I have two questions. Are there any others? The first being, are there any other cities that are currently revising their charter? And then the second question would be, in light of the current economic landscape of New York and the budget shortfalls coming down from Albany into the local level and tax revenue issues, in your opinion, is this a good time for a city to be putting their resources in this area?
I'm not aware of any other city that's looking at doing a charter commission necessarily, or a major revision. That doesn't mean it's not happening. They don't have to you don't have to register any place when you commence the process or you're interested in doing this. And I haven't received any phone calls. Generally, they would come to me. That doesn't mean they're not looking at it. They're busy times here. So, people are doing a lot of different things, responding to the pandemic and then the fiscal issues. And then, of course, all the reforms. It may just be getting lost in the shuffle in that respect. As far as is now a good time, if there's something that needs to be addressed, I can't really think of a reason why you would want to wait. Stated differently, if there are charter revisions that need to be made, if you need to make a change and improve your charter, I guess maybe there could be examples, but I wouldn't say necessarily you should wait. I don't think that's a clear-cut answer to that. I think it does depend on the specifics. So there may be, how much money are you talking about? Because again, these are going to be fiscally challenging times. I mean, they already are now, and depending on what help we get, fingers crossed, from the federal government, what the state gets, and if the state's willing to pass anything on to local governments, we'll see. I mean, there's definitely going to be tough times, no doubt about that. But if amending the charter now may make a ton of economic fiscal sense. I don't know. It depends on what you're looking to do and why you're looking to do it.
Right. I believe that I'm concerned about if the Charter Commission recommends a city manager style of government, we're then going to be paying more money, like the city of Poughkeepsie pays a city manager $148,000, and that's more than our mayor makes. And then we're going to have a ceremonial mayor that we also have to pay. So it could end up costing more.
Same discussion was had in Saratoga Springs. Huge part of the discussion up there is what is going to be the financial impact. And so, and that's a great question. It's not necessarily something that is going to be clear in the charter provisions itself, but if that's what you're looking to do, is establish a manager form of government, you do need to be aware of okay, what does that entail? What does it take to, and that's not going to be set forth in the statute or the charter, right? You're not going to, I wouldn't recommend putting the salary in the charter. You could, I wouldn't recommend it. But what's the market right now for managers if you're switching to that form of government? I will say, a good manager could maybe save you money. I mean, a professional who's got years experience in managing a workforce and negotiating contracts, Being a chief executive officer, again, that's a steep learning curve too. I mean, you can get, depending, next election, I'm not mayor. I'm not advocating anybody run against you. But next election, somebody could run for mayor and get elected and have zero experience. And that may not be a good situation because they may not know how to manage a workforce. And you could end up with, financial issues that way as well. So it's a good question. Usually, I highly recommend that you reach out to Saratoga Springs and talk with them. Also, in addition to Poughkeepsie, talk with Oneonta as well. And they just shifted over to the manager form of government. We are not. I think that's a trend you'll see. Other states, in fact, Canada is huge on manager form of government. New York is not, doesn't have that manager form of government culture that other states do have, but we do have a shift toward that. We're seeing more and more municipalities, cities, villages, some towns employ managers.
Yeah, it's not necessarily something that we all want to do, but I know that our leading advocacy group is pushing for that. So.
Pros and cons. It's not a clear yes or no answer, in my opinion. We have some very good cities that are run by excellent mayors who are got elected. I think as Alderwoman Worthington had a question. I can't hear you.
Rita, you're muted, Rita. There you go.
I still can't hear you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I'm off mute. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there's just a little bit of lag. You're good.
Yes? Okay. Actually, Alderwoman. Okay. Actually, Alderwoman Hirsch, she asked my question and you answered it. I wanted to know what the financial impact would be.
If you haven't already
But you answered
out,
it.
Yeah, one of the resources too I would recommend is that you reach out to ICMA. Have you reached out to them yet?
No.
There's information. ICMA is a not-for-profit that represents it's the Association for Professional City and County Managers. And my hunch is, although I haven't seen lately, I'm looking at their website right now, that they probably have some information about what the going salary is for managers. That's what you'd be, you're competing in that marketplace then for professional managers. If you're looking to attract somebody potentially nationally and compensate them, you're delving into that market, and you want to be aware.
I'm sorry, just going to interrupt. All of this is just a big if, because that's not saying that all of us want to change the form of government. So
right. Well, and one of the things I go back to this is like, why are you looking to do this? What is the goal objective? What do you think the issue is? And before you even go to the charter revision process, like maybe, hey, let's figure out a little bit more about what we want to do. Like, what is the goal and objective potentially of going down the charter revision process and path?
Okay, I think that's all the time we had allotted, but if anybody has a parting question. All right, well, thank you very much, Wade. This was extremely...
Thanks for having me again. I'll send my contact information, and Andrea can feel free to share it, and it's on our website at www.nicom.org. I'll send the PowerPoint slides as well and a copy of our handbook for city officials so everybody can share that among the council members. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you, you too. All right. That was very good. Now we are moving Sorry, I keep. Now we are moving on with the agenda. I'm just going to reiterate what the agenda is going to be, just so people know if they have something that's later on the agenda, they can. They don't have to stay for the whole time. They can log off and come back. So the next item we have on the agenda is the development of workforce for Golden Hill, the tree commission membership. Then after that, we have the open space plan, towing fees. That's number 5. Number 6 is the building zoning laws. The number 7 is commercial vacancy tax. Mobile food truck legislation is number 8. And lastly, we have policing. So we have the next item on the agenda is the workforce for Golden Hill. And we have Dennis Doyle. I believe I had seen him, but Dennis, are you on?
His camera is still here. He's still logged in.
Okay.
He's serving beer somewhere.
Should we move on and then come back to him? The next item I don't think will take too long. It's the membership, updating the membership of the Tree Commission. And we had Sue Cahill here to speak on that. Hi, Sue.
I'm here. Hello, everybody. Yes, what we want to do is presently the Tree Commission is set at a membership of 9 persons. Among those, we have a professionally trained individual. We do have a member of the Memorial Tree Fund. We have a member of the planning department or another department who at presently is myself, and we have a liaison who is Alderman Morrell. Everyone else are lay people and City of Kingston residents. What we are looking to do is reduce the number of members on the commission from 9 to 7. And what we would like to do is slide the current seated professional person, who is John Duvall. He's an excellent member, participates in all our meetings, helps us out with a lot of research on various trees throughout the City of Kingston. He takes a look, he makes solid, firm, educated recommendations to us. Who is the member of the Memorial Tree Fund, and she's been on the commission for quite some time now. The Memorial Tree Fund has been a very active participant with the commission all throughout its existence. They help us a lot with the Arbor Day celebration. They provide funds when they're needed for memorial plaques or for tree plantings in different people's memory and honor. So what I would like to do is continue with the liaison and myself as ex officio, just advisory members to the commission. And I would like to move the professional member and the Memorial Tree Fund representative to voting members. So we would have 5 voting members and then 2 ex officios. The current members are Vince Archer, who is also a planning board member. He's very active and very interested participant. Sarah Wenk is another one of our members. She is a resident member as well. So we have 1 open slot right now for a resident. So that is essentially what I want to do. I've provided to the committee and the council as a whole the language in both a red line form so you could see where the changes are made, and then in the body of the report from Laws and Rules, I wrote it out without the red line. So I don't know if anyone has questions.
Yeah, well, I think it's a very good idea to have, especially the professional as a voting member. I hadn't realized that he wasn't a voting member. It just makes complete sense to me. But my question is, would making that requirement that 1 one of the voting members has to be a professional. Would that make it difficult if he chooses not to continue to fill that position in the future?
No, we have never had an issue with having a professional on the commission. Sometimes they get busy. There's quite a few tree companies in our area, and several have expressed interest. What happens, though, with a lot of the companies, the larger companies, is that when we get applications, and if they are the company that the individual, the resident owner wants to utilize, they obviously cannot vote on an issue. So many of them have backed away from being on the job. But John has proven to be an excellent member. And as you know, Jeff, he goes out frequently. I will call him and ask him to take a look at certain issues with trees around the city. And he generally does it within 1 or 2 days and gets back to me. So he's very responsive.
Yes. Any other questions? Okay, so I will read the committee report that Sue has provided. It reads, Tree Commission creation term of office. There is hereby created and established a tree commission consisting of 7 members to be appointed by the mayor, at least one of who shall be either professionally trained or experienced in the field of municipal arboriculture. One of who shall be a member of the Common Council, one of who shall be a member of the Planning Department or other appropriate city department, and one of who shall be a member of the Memorial Tree Fund, Inc. All lay members of the commission shall be citizens and actual residents of the city of Kingston. The member of the Common Council and the member of the Planning Department or other city department shall be ex officio members of the commission and shall have no vote on matters before the commission. There shall be 5 voting members. All members of the commission shall serve without pay. Do I have a motion? Patrick O'Reilly, and I have a second by Alderman Scott Childress. All in favor?
On camera.
Okay, Don, do you have a vote? Alderman Tollerman, are you on?
Hi, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Hello?
Yes.
In favor. I vote in favor.
Okay. So,
Okay.
anyone opposed? All right. So the motion passes. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you very much. Have a nice evening, everybody. I'm
Thank
going to
you.
hang around for a little bit and listen to the others.
Okay. So I see we have Dennis Doyle back on camera, and he is here to speak about the development of workforce housing at Golden Hill. Hi, Dennis.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. First of all, my apologies. My internet's a bit quirky, so I'm on by phone plus by computer. So I went out before when you called on me, and I apologize. These things always happen in a timely fashion. My thanks to the committee members for an opportunity to talk about this. I want to put it in some context. The county is going through a process of reevaluating and reestablishing its concern with respect to housing, and both at the county executive level and at the county legislature level. They've passed a series of resolutions relative to looking at housing. One has to do with actually requesting the city's land bank to expand to a countywide land bank. And as part of that resolution, they actually asked the county planning department to look at county lands that may be available, both existing and perhaps those that we acquire through for tax foreclosure purposes, that may be available to help meet the county's housing needs. In addition, the county is also involved in looking at a countywide housing action plan, and we formed a special committee to do that work. And we've engaged a consultant with respect to that, and that kickoff meeting is going to begin Thursday. And I would say that the origination of this, the discussion with respect to what to do with the vacant lands on Golden Hill have been ongoing, I would say, since the county moved out of its former jail facility when it constructed the new jail. There's been various proposals over the times by at least two administrations for the use of those lands and for what we could do. And the primary impetus behind where we are today is that resolution from the county that asked the county planning board to identify lands that had a potential for meeting some of the housing needs in Ulster County. And one of the first things that the planning department did was identify lands associated with Golden Hill, in particular the areas in and around the former jail facility. We've identified an area up there of approximately 15 acres that could be part of a subdivision process, and approximately somewhere in the neighborhood, depending upon how you calculate it, somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 to 10 buildable acres that includes the former jail facility itself. We have issued an SOQ, a statement of qualifications. It's similar to what the city did relative to its efforts with regard to the Kingstonian project and the use of city lands in that instance. And so what we're hoping that the council would consider as part of that, the current zoning on Golden Hill is RRR, which is the least dense zone in the city. And it's zoned for single family residential. That frankly does not meet the potential and opportunities that Golden Hill affords us. And so what we're trying to do is ask the council to be supportive of a look at the Golden Hill facilities with respect to what could happen up there. We certainly recognize that this kind of support gives us a lot more leverage in terms of talking to developers to know that the city is not hostile to a rezoning proposal up there. It certainly doesn't. It's the beginning of the process, not the end of a process. We would recognize that the developer, when chosen, would have to go through a zoning petition, which the council would have complete authority over. In addition, they would have to go through all of the necessary planning board approvals that would be required. And finally, they would have to complete all the seeker documents and seeker work that would need to be done, State Environmental Quality Review Act work, which would have to be done with respect to that. So this is sort of basically saying that the city recognizes that there's an opportunity on Golden Hill that is not currently extant within the existing zoning statute, and suggests that it's willing to work with the county and the developer as it looks to essentially see what's out with regard to that, or what can come out of that. I will tell you that the SOQ requires developers not only to submit qualifications, but also a concept plan. And within that SOQ, there is documentation which asks them to meet certain goals of the county, not the least of which is essentially affordable housing. The second, and if we go on down the line, multi-generational is what broad inclusion of multi-generational, same thing with respect to mixed income. And finally, a criteria that suggests that we want to look at sustainability and resiliency issues associated with that development as well.
Any questions? Yes, Renee Scott Childress.
Hey, Dennis, thanks for that presentation, and thanks for all the planning work you do in the county. I know that it's a miracle of stuff you get done. It's one thing to talk about developing that particular parcel. There's a lot of questions, though, about the increase in traffic that would be resulting from that. And you've got two key problem traffic points in that general area. One, of course, is the intersection of Golden Hill Drive and 32. And the other one is the, 73 Corners intersection at Greenkill and Fair Street and Wall Street Extension and all of that. So in any development plan for this, would remediation of those two problem intersections be part of the process in any substantive way?
So I don't want to speak in terms of what mitigation would look like. What I would say, and what I did say in my introduction, was that the petition to rezone and the environmental work necessary for the site plan and or special use permit approvals would be controlled by the city. So if the city felt that there were issues associated with those intersections, either at Glen Street or at the intersection of 32 or at the Five Corners intersection, the city could make sure that that's addressed as part of the review and approval process, similar to what they have done in other instances when they went through that approval process. I think the key from my look at this is that what we're trying to establish is that there's an opportunity here. We want to give everyone an opportunity, the ability to explore it, with the idea that we're not exploring it in a confrontational manner. We're exploring it in a manner that says, if we can solve these problems, the city would like them to, if they are problems, the city would like this to go forward.
Well, absolutely. I think in general, this is a wonderful opportunity. I see that there is the potential for some development there, and especially for workforce housing, and to the degree that we could also include lower levels of income housing in that development. I'm extremely excited about developing something.
Any other questions? Okay, just to reiterate, we're not approving rezoning or a particular project. We're just showing our support for the county to move forward and basically marketing this piece of property.
That's correct.
Alderman Tollerman has a question.
Hi, Dennis. Just this, I'm having some technical problems here. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
I can hear you now.
Thank you. So Dennis, I would just, it's a little unrelated, but that parcel that we've mentioned before, adjacent to the acres that you're discussing, is that being evaluated as a potentially possible to make it larger?
Let me just, I'm trying to understand where we're going here, John. The SOQ and what we're looking at only pertains to the parcels within the city of Kingston that are on Golden Hill, and not to other parcels where the county may have adjoining ownership.
Okay. I think we're getting feedback from your speaker.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dennis. Sorry about that.
No, I think what Councilman Tollerman is thinking about is that there are other properties on Golden Hill. Sorry.
John, can you mute yourself?
No.
You can't mute yourself. I will.
Good.
That better?
I think so.
Okay.
No,
Now I think
I've muted you. Now I think we should be good. I've muted Don. We're good to. Sorry, Dennis. Can you continue?
That's all right. Yeah. The county does have some other properties that are up there. There's a small property down by the at the health-related facility that the county had privatized previously. It's a small parcel. That's not included in the SOQ there, and quite frankly, not really suitable to multifamily housing. And there is other parcel that actually extends across the city line and into the town of Ulster that the county has previously surplused. That's not included in this particular petition as well, or this particular SOQ. But there are other development opportunities up there. The county has other things that we're looking at. One of the things is, since we took over the city bus system, we're actually looking at trying to expand our storage facilities up on Golden Hill. We're actively looking at places up there where they could be expanded. And we do have room. We think we have room up there. We're not sure about costs yet, but we think we have room up there. But from a housing perspective, there is that this property, I think, is the best one that makes most sense from a housing perspective. I do want to add that from an intensity of use on Golden Hill, the fact that the jail is no longer there with its inmates, shift changes, and visitation, the traffic to Golden Hill itself is not likely to increase what it was before we built the new jail.
Okay, so I have a resolution here. Resolution supporting the development of workforce mixed-use housing on underutilized lands on Golden Hill as per attached. And I have the whereases that Dennis provided. Do I have a motion? Motion by Alderman Scott Childress. Do I have a second? Second by Rita Worthington. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. Thank you, Dennis.
No, thank you very much. And I appreciate the time the committee has given me. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Okay. The next item on the agenda is the open space, the seeker determination for the open space plan. Do we have Julie Noble on? Hi, Julie.
Hi, Jeffrey. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Great.
Yes, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you for having me. This is the next step in the secret process for the council. And so we came last month and what happened was you adopted and accepted the environmental assessment forms, which were then distributed to the involved and interested agencies. And so the next step is to make a determination of significance. And that would either be a negative declaration, a positive declaration based on whether you think that there's environmental impact of this open space plan. So I presented a draft resolution that is requesting that you make a negative declaration. I am of the understanding that of the agencies that have submitted comments, they are all amenable that there is no significant environmental impact. Dan can speak to if he heard otherwise, or Lisa if they have any other information. So I am happy to answer any questions if anyone has any about the environmental assessment forms or about the process. But that would be my recommendation.
Thank you. Dan, you had something to add?
I know that we still have Dennis present. I did speak to Dennis Doyle this morning. The county planning board has not responded as of yet. Based on my conversations with Dennis, we believe they'll be able to address it at their meeting. I believe it's either the 1st or 2nd of July, and their comments should be back before the council votes on this. So there's no issue with this committee approving the negative declaration, subject to whatever concerns, if any, the county raises in July.
And that's the last response we're waiting for?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? No? Okay. So
Dennis,
I don't.
did you hear that?
Sorry?
I was just asking if Dennis had heard that because Dennis had stepped away.
Oh.
Yeah, I did. Dan. I'm listening to it on my phone in the other room as well. So yes, I did. Thank you.
Okay.
And Jeffrey, I certainly proceed as you will, but I will just note that if you would make a note that in the committee report, it should state NYCRR instead of NYRCC on the first line.
Okay. Yes. NYCRR. Thank you. Okay, so I will read the resolution. The committee report. A resolution that pursuant to 6 NYCRR, Part 617, the City of Kingston Common Council hereby determines that the City of Kingston Open Space Plan is a Type 1 action under seeker. Will have no potentially significant adverse environmental impacts and hereby renders a negative declaration in connection with this action. Do I have a motion? Motion by Patrick O'Reilly, second by Rennie Scott Childress. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. Anyone opposed? Okay. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Can we just, before Julie leaves, the committee also has the option to actually address the open space plan this evening and also make a recommendation to just approve it if the committee is ready to do that. Given that there were no questions or concerns with regard to the part 1, part 2, and part 3 that was prepared by Ms. Noble, you may want to proceed to that just to expedite the process.
So what would be the process for, what would be the committee report for that? Sorry. What would that read?
You would just add a line that basically says and approves the open space plan as submitted.
Oh, just add a line to this existing one?
Julie, you have no issue with that?
I don't, but as a point of order, I don't know if there needs to be a public hearing before that happens. Or if all of this is already qualified as a public hearing. Because this would be the adoption of the open space plan into the comprehensive plan.
President Schott, you had something?
Yeah, I mean, that's not what we came in expecting to vote on, and I don't know if there are other council members who are not in attendance right now would want to be part of that conversation. So I think, in my opinion, I think we were planning on voting for the seeker. I think that sounds like what Julie was under the impression of tonight too. So that would be what I would advocate for, and vote next time on what's due, but like make sure the rest of the council and the public is aware that that's what we're going to be voting on.
I wouldn't disagree with that, although I do want this process to come to an end eventually. I don't disagree with that. I don't want it to look like we're pulling the wool over anyone's eyes. I want to go through the due process. It doesn't matter to me either way. It's fine either way.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And just because we didn't give the public a chance to comment on it, I would be in favor of waiting until next month for that. If this is not a timely manner.
And merely letting you know that that is an option, not advocating for one approach or another. You do have the option to move forward at this point. If you don't want to do that, that's also perfectly fine. Just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
So then if that isn't the procedure for this evening, should I submit a request to be on the next Laws and Rules meeting for adoption?
I believe so. President Schott, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Julie.
Thanks. Bye.
Sorry, shuffling my papers as usual. So the next item we have on the agenda is the towing fees. And I have consulted with Corp Counsel, and it's my understanding that this needs to be a two-part process. Dan, correct me if I'm wrong. So the first step, well, let me give a little bit of background first. We had communication from a constituent who owns a towing company asking for towing fees to be included in the city's fee schedule. And so from my understanding, in order to do that, the first step would have to be to amend the code to include towing fees on the fee schedule. So just to add that line there. And then it would have to go to finance to establish what that fee should be. So is that correct then?
Yes, it is. There is language sprinkled throughout the code wherever fees are mentioned that basically says in a fee to be determined by the council and set forth in the fee schedule. We did that a number of years ago in order to consolidate all the fees in one place so that members of the public could open the fee schedule and just find out what the fees are. The comptroller had some concerns about putting the towing fee into the fee schedule because he didn't want any confusion with regard to whether towing fees come to the city and whether they're actually revenue. So what we discussed is including it in the fee schedule and including just an asterisk that says these are fees that are collected by the vendor and not revenue for the city. So what you would do is you would amend the code as Jeffrey indicated, and then finance would revisit the actual dollar amount in the fee schedule at their next meeting.
I believe Alderwoman Hirsch had a question. Did I see your hand up, Michelle? Oh, sorry. Any other questions?
I didn't have my hand up, but since you've called on me, I'll ask a question. So,
Okay.
curious why we are doing this now and why we would be wanting to put a larger expense on the taxpayer at this time during, a financial crisis. And would we also be increasing the fee for the towing company, their registration?
I don't believe we would be collecting the money. This is so the towing fee would be collected by the towing company. I believe they already collect the fee. So this is just so that the residents can go to one place and see every fee, and
Right.
this one included there.
Right. So the towing company collects money. Say they're going to collect $100. They collect $100 now. We pass this. We up the fee to $200. So, taxpayers then get towed. They have to pay a larger, say $200 instead of $100. But a tow truck driver also pays a fee to have a license to the city. So I believe it's like $100 a year or something. So would we be also there? So the tow truck drivers will be making more money. Will we be increasing what we make by charging them more as well?
I belive the fee itself would be discussed at finance. So that is something I'm not sure what that.
Are we only so I'm asking, are we only raising the fee that the tow truck driver would get for towing, for storage? Like what exactly are we doing and why are we doing it now?
President Schott, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I could fill in a little bit. I mean, the constituent reached out to us recently, which is why we're talking about it now, but we may decide if we put this in the fee schedule, once it comes to finance next month, that we just keep it at the current price. But now that it's on the fee schedule, I think, Dan, it's every January that we have to, the council votes on the fee schedule. So if we decide, you know what, now's not the time to raise prices, at least then it's on the schedule that we will be looking at. And we may decide to do it in January, or you may decide to do it in 2 years. So, I mean, a lot of the questions are more for the discussion. And yeah, I mean, you may want to just leave it at the price. But this way will also get us to look at it each year. It's kind of how I'm seeing it. Does that answer?
Yeah, we're not even. Alderwoman Hirsch, we're not even charging parking right now, so I just don't understand why we would pass on more of an expense to the community.
Our office's position is that either way, whatever the fee is, it should be in the fee schedule rather than in the body of the code. So as Andrea pointed out, finance is going to discuss whether it should be what it is now, whether it should be more or whether it should be less. But either way, including it in the subsection where it is now is inconsistent with the rest of the code.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So, Alderman O'Reilly.
So, hi, this is Alderman O'Reilly. So we are putting in the fee schedule fees for a private company or companies to, I'm sorry, I'm moving around, but my family's here. So we have a private company or private companies, and we are setting the fee schedule for them. Do we know any other fees that they might have, like storage fees if their nice truck shows up, their bigger truck shows up, their smaller truck shows up, all these things. I mean, if we're trying to be transparent with the public, all these things should also be listed on the fee schedule. Like, what are the actual fees for the tow, and then what's the fees for storage per 15 minutes, per hour, per day. Some people charge per hour, some people charge every 15 minutes, some people charge per day. Do we know that? I mean, are we allowing tow truck drivers to come in and then apply other fees on top of fees that we don't know about? I think that's probably one of the reasons that this wasn't included in our fee schedule. Thank you.
Just for clarification, the reason it wasn't included in the fee schedule was because when I went through the code to pull out all of the fees, okay, I missed this one. That's the only reason it wasn't included.
Alderman Scott Childress.
So then may I suggest that we call this the Dan Gartenstein Memorial Legislation?
Thank you very much. Yes.
Sorry, I'm just trying to write the committee report here. Yes, Alderman O'Reilly.
So what about all those other things? I mean, we could have a company that charges outrageous add-on fees. Are we doing anything about that?
Actually, Pat, if you look at the current 370.16, it addresses all additional charges. So basically what you would be doing is moving the schedule that is contained currently in 370.16 into the fee schedule. It addresses basically every add-on you can possibly imagine.
Thank you, Dan. You just answered the question. So the chapter on the code is 370.16. That would be amended.
370.16 sub C, and then it's 1A through E, and then 2A through G.
Okay. So I have are there any other questions? Okay, so I have a committee report here, and then if you hear me, if you need me to correct anything, let me know. Committee report to amend section of the code, chapter 370.16, for the inclusion of towing fees on the fee schedule and fees to be set by the Finance Committee. Is that correct, Dan?
Yes, the language you want to use is in a sum as set forth in the fee schedule to be established by resolution of the Common Council.
Okay. Can you repeat that? Sorry, you got cut off in the beginning.
As set forth in the fee schedule to be established by resolution of the Common Council of this city.
Okay, what he said. Do I have a motion? Motion by Alderman Scott Childress. Do I have a second? Second by Alderwoman Worthington. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, thank you. Okay. Sorry?
I just thank the listeners. It passed 5-0.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Sorry. I keep forgetting to say. Okay, the next item on the agenda is building and zoning laws. We had communication that was signed by several constituents asking for us to look into decision of the building department that a provision that's on the code that after 6 months, if there is no work done on a building site, the building permit should expire. We don't know when that was added to the code. It could have been decades ago, but according to the building department, they couldn't find instance of it being enforced. So the constituents have asked us basically to look into this matter, why it hasn't been enforced, and if it can't be enforced, why is it on the code? My concern going into this was that if the building department determined that it couldn't be enforced, they kind of took the role of the legislative body by deciding not to enforce it, as opposed to coming to us and asking for us to change the code instead. I had a late communication that just came today as I was preparing for this meeting. So that raised a couple of good questions. So I'm just gonna read those questions, and then we can discuss what we think the answer should be. If a law is on the book, does the city administration have the legal right not to enforce it? Can city officials make discretionary decisions as to when and under what circumstances the laws are enforced? And can they randomly decide that because a law hasn't been used, it is not enforceable? These questions have no bearing on what the project is, what this particular project in question is, or what the particulars of that project are. Abiding by and upholding the law established by a democratic process are fundamental responsibilities of government. If laws are allowed to be interpreted by individual administrators, it defeats the purpose of the rule of law. Anybody has a comment? Alderman Tullerman and then Alderwoman Worthington.
It's really a question for Dan, right? Because it seems to make sense that if you have a law that's not enforceable, why do either we determine that it's enforceable or we remove it?
Right.
So, I sort of would like Dan to explain what's going on here so we can make an intelligent decision.
Our office's position, and I believe building safety's position, is that the law is enforceable, that there were circumstances in this particular case that led them to the conclusion that it would not be enforced in this instance for a number of reasons. There are issues with regard to staffing levels at the building department and their ability to monitor the 6-month passage on every building permit. That is not the equivalent of saying that the statute is not enforceable.
Rita had a question, and then we'll go back to you, Don. Yes, Alderwoman Worthington.
Thank you, Rita Worthington here. So listening to Dan Gartenstein, then would that then apply to other building permits that have not lived up to the prerequisites? Then do we make the decision to arbitrarily not enforce that law depending on circumstances? Or how do we move? My concern is, how do we move forward with other permits?
And I just want to add to that,
The decision to enforce is strictly based on the circumstances, and therefore, by definition, it's not arbitrary.
I don't really know that.
Arbitrary basically means that it's being done without reason and without consideration of the circumstances. The laws in the code are all enforced or not enforced based on the circumstances. And that's precisely what happened in this instance.
But I'm
So again, is that how we?
Sorry, Rita. Dan, I'm reading on the code
Sorry,
here.
Jeffrey. I'm sorry.
The duties of the building safety officer. It says here, and maybe I'm not a lawyer, so maybe I'm just not reading it correctly. that it shall be the duty of the duly appointed building safety officer and zoning enforcement officer to enforce the provisions of this chapter and of all rules, conditions, and requirements adopted or specified pursuant thereto literally. So doesn't that mean that even if they don't follow up on the building permits when something is reported, they should follow it? That word literally just jumped out at me.
Again, this was a factual determination that was made within the discretion of the building department in this particular instance, as they do in any other instance. They receive a report, they do an inspection, they make a determination, they decide whether or not there are, there is a basis to proceed on a violation, and if there is, they act accordingly. It's a fact-specific inquiry on every particular case.
Okay, I believe Alderman Tullerman had something, and then Alderman Scott Childress, and then President Schott.
So Dan, in this instance, there was a violation, and so they decided that they should not enforce this specific case. Is that what happened? And it was because
in this instance, there was a determination that there was not a violation.
Okay. So that's a separate, if they determine there's no violation, then we're not saying that they're not enforcing the law. I mean, there's a nuisance law on our books that says people need to cut their lawns. There may be 100 cases where people aren't cutting their lawns, but the building department shouldn't be expected to go inspect every lawn. But if there's a complaint, then they respond to the complaint, and then they make the determination whether or not to proceed, which sounds like is what happened here. There was a complaint, and they determined that that they were not breaking the law. Is that correct, Dan?
They decided that under the circumstances, there was not a basis to declare the permit void.
So,
and again, that decision was appealed to the Zoning Board of Appeals, which is the process that is set forth in the code. We were scheduled to hear that appeal when the individual who brought the complaint withdrew the appeal.
Alderman Scott Childress.
So as I understand it, this is a little bit similar. If there was a hurricane, say, and a permit expired during the hurricane at the beginning of it, we would not expect building safety to come in the next day and say, oh, this permit is now invalid. There's these circumstances. That's one thing. But then, the other part here seems to me that there has to be some discretion. And if they're making this decision, there's a process then for adjudicating it that's clearly laid out in the code, as Dan pointed out, and that's the process that should be followed. And so if the complainant withdraws the complaint, that's the end of the issue.
But it seems like we're being told to, I don't know. That's not the answer I was given originally. The answer I was given originally was that the building department doesn't have the capacity to enforce this. So I think my proposal I have three things that I would like to see happen, and if this committee agrees. One thing would be other municipalities have this same 6-month provision. So I would like to reach out to the Department of State or to NICOM and find out, first of all, why this 6-month provision is on the code, what is the purpose of it, and if those other municipalities that have the same provision are also having trouble with capacity to enforce it, or if they are enforcing it, what they're doing to enforce it. The second thing I would suggest is, since we've been told that we can't directly reach out to department heads, we were told that at our last finance meeting, I would suggest that we request a building safety report from the mayor indicating, one, what it would take in terms of infrastructure for this to be able to be more enforced, if a database has to be created or what, or if it's determined that the capacity just doesn't exist to enforce it, then what should we change it to? Because it can't remain on the books as it is if we're being told we don't have the capacity to enforce it.
But Jeffrey, according to Dan Gartenstein, it's not about the capacity.
Yes, President Shaw.
Process.
But we are getting mixed answers.
We're getting very
here.
mixed messages here.
Because I think at least several of us have heard that this law is not enforceable and that they don't have the capacity. And that's really why this was brought to the council, in my understanding, is because we, as the city council, made this law. And so if it's not being enforced, that's why we were asked to look at it, not this particular circumstance. So we have heard it's not enforceable. So that's, where now hearing that it is enforceable is really changing what the original communication and what original answers have been. So I think that just has to go back to that simple question: is this law enforceable? And and I would the charter says that under the general powers and duties of the mayor, that the mayor shall take care that in said city the laws of the state and the ordinances of the common council and the board of health are enforced. So maybe we also have a conversation with the mayor about this too. So I liked, reaching out, your suggestion of reaching out to him, because that's the question. Is this law enforceable? And if it's yes, then we have nothing to say about this particular instance. If it's no, then as lawmakers, I think this body does have something to say. So it's just trying to get a straight answer with that. And we've been hearing it back and forth. I think that, Don, that's the problem. Or at least the problem that
Yeah, and also I think, since we are now prevented from reaching out to department heads, unless the instance of an investigation, I would suggest then maybe, since we're getting mixed messages and we don't know which is the case or what this, and if we don't know the whole story, we can't make an informed decision. I would maybe suggest we should start an investigation. So, but that's I think reaching out to the mayor would be a first step, and determining if this is enforceable, then we have nothing to discuss. If it's not enforceable, what it would take to enforce, or what it should be changed to so that it is enforceable. So there's, yes, Alderwoman Worthington.
Yes, Reed Worthington here. So I'm in favor of trying to get this question answered as to whether this law is enforceable or not. Dan Gartenstein mentions mitigating circumstances, and then even the appeal process, but one has to do with the other. I don't think the appeal process has, whether it to continue appeal process has to do with whether this is enforceable or not. Is it enforceable? And if it isn't, then how do we move forward?
Yes, President Schott.
And may I just make a suggestion that if you're willing to do the work, Jeffrey, that you could reach out to the mayor and have a conversation about that. But just going back to that simple question, is this law enforceable? And then take it from there.
If the committee agrees, I will do that. Okay, I see two nodding. Is the rest of the committee in favor of? Okay, then I will do that. Thank you. Okay, so we can move on to the next agenda item, which is the commercial vacancy tax. And I saw Alderman Tollerman today, and he said he has some more work to do, so I'll let him take this. You're muted, Don.
Should know by now. So yes, vacancy tax is a work in progress because we want to make it more than just punitive. We don't want to just punish owners. The idea really is to enliven our retail, to enliven our business districts. So I'm working on legislation with a much more broad view to entice, not only to entice building owners to lease their spaces to unique retail, but also to attract more unique retailers to our city and give us a point of distinction versus other places. It's a great place to be post-COVID, where so many people are now just ordering from Walmart online or Amazon. I think we have a real opportunity to create something special here in our retail environment. So that's what I'm working on, and hopefully we'll have something next month to present to the committee.
Thank you. All right. So then we look forward to your findings in our next meeting.
Thank you.
And then our next item on the agenda is the mobile food truck legislation that was also presented by, sponsored by Alderman Tollerman. So I will let him speak to that as well.
Okay, this is Don Tollerman. So the mobile food truck legislation has evolved a little bit. We have listened to some of our residents to hear what they have to say about it. Also, fellow committee members. We have reduced the fee for the permit to $50 because we don't want to make this difficult for people to apply, and also the violation expenses have also been slightly reduced. We have heard there's a comment which from Alderman O'Reilly, which I think was spot on, that the fingerprints make this a little more difficult. I don't think we need to go through the fingerprinting process. So I would amend this, later on before we go to a final vote with the committee. And the only other thing was that we've heard from restaurant owners that they feel that this would be a difficult, would serve as competition to them, and they asked for the food trucks to be located far, far away from their locations while they're open. And so I did some research. I looked at other cities, and we came up with a 500-foot clearance so that you can't operate a food truck within 500 feet of the restaurant that's open. I think that is more than fair. It's not going to be right across the street or just stone's throw away. But it's not too far where you're boxing the food trucks out of a neighborhood. They just have to go down what essentially would be a block or a block and a half. And also, I have been reaching out to the food truck owners because as part of this process, we want to help them make sure that they do, that anybody who's negatively affected by this will have some help from the city to, if they need to relocate or find a new spot. We certainly would want to help any entrepreneur who is trying to make money, make a living with their food truck. So with those comments, I'd like to make a motion to move forward with this proposal.
Okay. So I have a motion to adopt mobile food truck legislation.
We didn't have any discussion yet.
Right. I was just going to ask on the question. Rita Worthington.
Rita Worthington here. So, Don, thank you very much for amending this proposal and doing the research on it, and also amending those fees. I really appreciate that. I did reach out to, I'm calling him my food truck guy now, that since he's right down the street, around the corner and down the street from me. The one thing that I, concerned about, there's a provision in this proposal that food truck owners, within a 24-hour period, they have to move their truck. And so my guy says that that is going to be difficult for him to do. As it stands right now, this is how they make their money. This is how they make their living. And so I can't co-sign this proposal, and having him find somewhere else to move that truck if he doesn't have anywhere to move it. So that is my only issue. I don't have a problem with fees. I don't have a problem with any of the other issues in me.
I'd just like to clarify that I believe the provision for them to move the truck, if it is a truck that, and Don, correct me if I'm wrong, and then I saw President Schott's hand up, that if they go through they get a permit from the planning department, basically, that would allow them to stay put. President Schott, you had something?
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention. I remember talking about, I don't know if Dan Gardenstein is still here. I remember talking about this briefly, and I don't know if we were talking about this specific truck, if they already have the permit from the planning board. Dan, have you heard, did you hear this question, and can you jump in, or?
Yeah, I'm here, and this particular truck has been in front of the planning board, and the property has been in front of the planning board repeatedly over the last period of years, and he currently has site plan approval. There are issues related to that truck that are raised every year in front of the planning board. The planning board retains jurisdiction, and I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics of that particular vehicle or that particular parcel.
Alderman Scott Childress?
Is there a distinction between a food truck that's on a public street versus one that's sitting on private property here?
Yes, and that's where the site plan approval comes into play. If it's on private property, it needs site plan approval by the planning board.
So that seems to address Rita's concern. Am I correct in that?
Are you asking me if it addresses Rita's concern, or are you asking Rita?
Anybody who has an answer.
Well, I don't know if that addresses my concern. I know that the circular food truck has been before the planning board numerous times, and unfortunately, he seems to still be having some issues. And so I'd like to get those findings from the planning board of what those particular issues are before I tell him that he has to move his truck.
Alderman Tullerman?
Rita, so just to answer more directly, he's not affected by it. It is private property, so he would not be affected by the 24-hour rule. He's only under the jurisdiction of the planning board. So that would not affect him. It's a planning board issues that he would need to work through. And I just want to respond to your thought there. Our goal here is as people experience our city, we want them to look good, and we wouldn't want our streets lined with food trucks. Certainly, cafes, restaurants. We're all for street life. but we are spending $30 million on our Broadway streetscape as one example. And that's a great spot for a taco cafe. But a food truck that's there 24/7 is not helping our cities look, especially when we're spending so much money to improve our city's appearance.
So, Don, with all due respect, I'm for the city looking good, but I'm also for people making a living. And if that is their only living, I'm hesitant to tell them that they can no longer do it because we want to make city look good. Dan just said that is the site approval process that he would have to go through, whether he could leave his truck there or not. And then you just said because it's on private property, he's okay. So I just need clarification in that.
I was going to ask the same question, Dan. You just said that they already have site plan approval, correct?
Their site plan approval goes through the planning board on an annual basis. He currently has site plan approval. He will be up again for site plan approval shortly. Each year this has come up. The planning board has expressed concerns about the specific configuration on that property and the mixes of uses on that property. And the planning board addresses this progressively. The 24-hour rule, which is what was initially asked about, doesn't apply to his truck because it's on private property. It's subject to site plan approval.
Yes, President Schott.
Yeah, so just clarifying, this 24 hours is only for food trucks that are on public property. Correct? It cannot supersede anything that the planning board would have to do for something that's on private property. Correct?
Is that directed at me? Yes. The planning board has jurisdiction with regard to the configuration of businesses on a particular site. Okay. Don's legislation specifically provides that on public streets, a food truck cannot be parked for a period of 24 hours, in excess of 24 hours.
Okay. Alderman Scott Childress, and then I think I saw Alderman Coop's hand up. Alderman Scott Childress.
Right. So it sounds like there's a North Carolina barbecue truck that sometimes parks right there across from the Governor Clinton by the Academy Green Park. And he never leaves the truck there for 24 hours. So that would be a perfectly fine use because there's no restaurant within 5 minutes there. Certainly not one that's open. There's no restaurant whatsoever. And since he doesn't stay 24 hours, this would be perfectly fine use and completely separate from the use of the truck that's on Broadway that Reed is talking about.
Yes, Alderman Coop.
Yeah, to Don Talon, I would question, Don, the imposition of a 500 feet separation from an open restaurant. 500 feet, that's a long way. A football field is 300 feet. Just to put perspective on it, I would think it's geometrically impossible that a food truck could park anywhere in Uptown without violating 500 feet. So I understand the intent, but I think I think 500 feet might be a little bit on the tough side.
But if I'm not mistaken, the 500 feet rule can be waived if they get permission from the restaurant owner to be there.
Which is probably highly unlikely.
So go ahead, Patrick.
Hi, Patrick Riley. Isn't the used to be called the 11 Main restaurant at 11 Main Street? There's a restaurant right there. I bet that's within 500 feet of that pork truck, which I always kind of like seeing as I go by. That man is a hard-working man. I see him there every day. I'm glad he has a spot to park. That will probably, with your 500-foot rule, I would imagine, would be either removed or from that spot, or have to move to a location he really doesn't want to be at. And I agree with, and I brought this up, as you know, earlier, the 500-foot rule. There's really no place uptown Kingston. Not really. There's really no place in Midtown, or there's really no place in downtown Kingston that we could have a food truck 500 way. And I also don't appreciate is the fact that you're saying we're going to clean up Kingston with some of these food trucks. Some of these food trucks are wonderful, beautiful trucks. I mean, very expensive. So to just say that we're going to clean up Kingston and these trucks are ugly and this is a cleanup job, something that you personally want to do for Kingston, I don't think that's the way legislation should go. This whole thing just kind of reeks of that for me, and I would say the word reeks is the keen word here. I think we're targeting certain people, targeting certain businesses. I don't like it. I don't think it should happen, and I just don't like the whole premise. Thank you very much.
Yes, Don Tallerman.
Yeah, I just want to make a motion on the legislation.
All right, so I have a motion to adopt mobile food truck legislation. Yes, Alderman Scott Childress.
Well, I'm wondering if we need to make an amendment first, because if 500 feet is too much, what's a distance that people would feel more comfortable with? There's also, I thought that a truck owner could get a waiver from the city. Is that not right? The waiver would be from the restaurant owner?
I think that that's not in the current legislation, but is a good amendment, as well as reducing the distance, to another, to something we can agree on. I don't know the process for doing amendments, but I think those are both reasonable amendments.
I would like to hear Alderman Coop's input on this, since he is in direct communication with Coop. What would be a reasonable distance?
I don't know what the reasonable distance would be. I think that might take a little research to do, because it would be like I said, in Uptown, these restaurants are so close together that even 100 feet could be problematical for a food trip. So I don't know for a food truck. So I don't know what the answer to that is. But I think having the restaurant owner as part of the decision-making process is a bad way, because if I own a restaurant, I want the food truck to be 1,000 feet away. There's no way I want a food truck near my restaurant. So that person cannot be part of the process to say whether I agree or whether I don't disagree. Beyond that, I'm not sure what the distance should be, but I think 500 feet is certainly way too far.
Alderman Scott Childress, and then Alderwoman Worthington.
Well, I would like to build on Doug's point there. This is part of the issue for the restaurant owners who have a brick and mortar store. They've got overhead that a food truck doesn't have. They've got other kinds of expenses that a food truck doesn't have. And so, to some degree, there's an element here of a question of fairness. And food trucks I associate with events. So, when we have the Huli on the Hudson, for example, we have lots of food trucks that come to that. That's a wonderful sort of thing. That's a perfect example of where the city would offer waivers, because clearly there's restaurants right there that are open during the Huli, and we wouldn't want to prevent food trucks from being down there, for example. So I think we do have to be sensitive to the restaurant owners who are also hardworking people, the brick and mortar restaurant owners. And when we're talking about this issue, I'm not sure exactly where that lands us in terms of the distance and so forth. But to me, there is an element of fairness there to consider.
Yes, Alderman Coop. Oh,
Yeah,
I believe Alderman Worthington had something to say first. Sorry.
Thank you. Rita Worthington here. So yeah, I want to consider, the restaurant owners and the food truck owners. I think, unfortunately, though, I know I'm talking about the food truck that's in my ward. That's all I can talk about. I don't know about the other food trucks. This food truck, this guy does not move. He's on private property. I'm hearing could possibly get a waiver. The city could possibly help out. But when I go back and listen, and when I, recall what Don said about we want to clean up the streets and we're putting $30 million into the cleaning up Kingston, I automatically feel like my guy is being ruled out. I can't co-sign on that. That's where
Yes, Alderman Coop.
Yeah, I think food trucks are a different market segment than brick and mortar. They're two totally different. A restaurant up on Wall Street, you go in there, it's a little, some of them are, you might call them, quote, upscale. You go in, you sit down, there's music playing. It's an entirely different experience than going up to a food truck and getting a taco as you go by. And I'm not sure that they're really that competitive, and they're there some days and they're not there some days. So I really think that Don's done a good job on looking at the fees. That makes a lot of sense. And I don't think any of us find disagreement with that, but I really take exception to this geometric offset. I think personally, I would like to see it 0. Thank you.
Yes, Patrick O'Reilly.
Yeah, what Doug said is absolutely right. These food trucks are the same as brick and mortar. By the way, the brick and mortar restaurants move it right in next to the other restaurants. You know why? Because they have business clientele that's walking by, business clientele who want to go to restaurants. How many times have you gone to one restaurant? It's been busy, so you go to the place next door. My wife and I do that all the time. If you have a restaurant, you want other restaurants near you. This food truck, by the way, and if they don't, their disadvantage is that they have to move every day. Their disadvantage is that when it's raining out, no one comes. So they do have disadvantages to being a truck on the street, and the fact that they have to move, and the way they have to deal with their garbage and the way they have to deal with their food, everything is a disadvantage for them. So to say that a food truck is a disadvantage for a restaurant nearby, I think is kind of ridiculous. As a matter of fact, if I bring my kids to a food truck and they want to go get a hot dog from Dallas Hot Wieners, guess what? I get something from the food truck. We go over to Dallas Hot Wieners. We get a hot dog too. It's a good thing for business. It's not a bad thing for business. That kind of thinking, I think, is short-sighted. And I have to agree with. I don't know if 0 is a good one, but it might be the fair number. Thank you.
Alderman Scott Childress.
Yeah, I would just, Rita, we're not, this whole conversation isn't about the truck on Broadway. That's planning board. I think that they're safe as long as they satisfy the planning board. The other thing is, just for people's information, the closest restaurant to Academy Green Park is the one on Fair Street, and it's more than 500 feet away from where the North Carolina barbecue guy parks his truck. Just saying that, I'm not arguing for the 500 feet, just letting you know that, that is an appreciable distance there.
Yes, Alderman Tellerman.
So I'd like to propose an amendment to shorten the distance. I think I'm hearing all the conversation and good points are made on both sides. But I think that if a truck were to park right in front of a restaurant, I think that's not fair. And so if we had a little bit of distance, call it 150 feet, then, I'd propose making that amendment and bringing that to the floor.
Okay. So, what's the procedure here? Should we move forward with the motion that's already on the table and make the amendments?
I think you have to vote on the amendment.
Yeah, well, it has to be discussed.
Then go to the full motion.
Okay, so what is, so did we decide on a distance, or are we going to go back and do research on this?
I'm proposing 150 feet.
We have to have a second on that before anybody can speak to the specific distance.
Okay, so I have a motion to amend this legislation from 500 feet to 150. Oh, sorry, from 500 feet to distance to be discussed. Do I have a second on that?
I thought that it was 150 feet. I thought there was a specific distance proposed. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah, Don said 150 feet, so it's 500 feet to 150 feet. That's the amendment proposed.
I will second that for the purposes of discussion.
Okay. On the question, all in favor?
No, we have to discuss.
On the question of the amendments, I'm so confused right now and hungry. Okay, on the question. Yes, Patrick O'Reilly.
Hey, Rennie, did you look up the Keegan Ales? Aren't they right on the other side of that, on St. James Street? That could be a little closer. Anyhow, what the point is that there's lots of buildings that are restaurants that we're not even thinking about, people running little shops and things like that serve food that we're not even thinking about. And as for Rita, I think this is just step one, Rita. They're coming after that guy. So that's what I feel. Thank you.
Sorry.
Question.
Yes, Alderwoman Worthington. Rita, go ahead.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry. I didn't hear you. Rita Worthington. I know we're on the proposed amendment right now, but Rennie, I guess clarified. I think it also with Alderman O'Reilly. Again, what stands out, we're trying to clean of Kingston. We have put $30 million into cleaning up the streets. And so my guy falls in that line of thinking. And so whether that has to do with a planning board issue or not, they're coming after him, and I'm not.
Alderman Scott Childress?
No, I pass.
Oh, okay. Alderman Coop.
Yeah, I think we also have to take into consideration if it's 150 feet or 50 feet or whatever it is, how is that measured? Is that as the crow flies or as you traverse from point A to point B on city streets? As an example, I would venture a guess that the edge of Keegan's is probably within 150 feet of the edge of Academy Green as the crow flies. So, how are you going to enforce this? Do you have to get out tape measures and so on? It's a mess. I don't like to see any number because I think it's going to cause us problems. I know the amendment. I'm not a member of the committee. I can't vote on it, but I don't like the 150 feet or 50 feet or 2 feet.
Alderman Scott Childress, and
Thank
then
you.
Yes, I hear the concern, Rita. That's not my issue at all. The question of quote unquote cleaning up Broadway. I want to make sure that we've got great entrepreneurs. I know those people in that truck you're talking about work really hard. They do have some specific issues that are related to the planning board, but the planning board is not related to this discussion at all. These are two very separate issues. I don't think there's no covert connection going on here. So, that's a different issue, because we could vote this down and the planning board would still have its issues with that particular site. That's all.
Alderman Riley?
As I've said many times, we set a tone as aldermen. We set a tone in the city of Kingston, financial tones. Businesses are running away from our city because of our financial tone that we set here sometimes. Housing, developers are leaving the city of Kingston because of the tone that we set. This tone that we're setting with this legislation is not good. It's just, I don't know. It just really rung a wrong bell with me. This whole idea of, just cleaning up Kingston, not something I could ever support in any fathom of the imagination. So, as I said, the tone is going to go to the planning board. The tone that we set is important. And if this is the tone that you guys are willing to set, I can tell you I'm not. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Alderman Scott Childress.
All due respect to Alderman O'Reilly, the planning board is not allowed to make their decisions based on any tone or any decisions that we make. They are completely separate and independent. And so I don't want anybody out there believing that there's some kind of connection there. The other thing is, I don't think businesses are running away from Kingston, and I don't think housing developers are running away from Kingston either. Again, I don't see those as issues on this particular case. I do hear what you're saying, though. We want to make sure that we are working to provide an open place for people to ply their wares. And, I think food trucks are definitely a part of that. There's just a question of what the relationship should be. And there is some concern. Maybe we need to talk about it, look into it a little bit further, get more testimony perhaps from some restaurant owners, some food truck owners, some actual people who are involved in these, and get a real sense of, is there a way that we can make sure that they all are feeling comfortable in their relationships with us. I appreciate what Alderman O'Reilly said. There is competition. You can have a restaurant, a brick and mortar restaurant, and somebody can move in another restaurant right next door to you. True. But that's still a different beast from what a food truck is. It's a different segment of the market, a different way of selling food. So, I think that we might want to just look at this a little bit more, maybe. So on the particular amendment, I'm happy to vote against it or for it. I think it's time for us to move on to either tabling or voting on the full amendment.
Yes, so we have a motion and a second on the table on the amendment itself, not on the legislation, just on the amendment from 500 feet to 150 feet. So I'm going to call for a vote on that, and then we can decide how we proceed with the legislation. So all in favor of this amendment?
I'll vote in favor.
Okay. Opposed? Okay, so that's 3-2 on the amendment from the distance from 500 feet to 150 feet. Now, on
Jeffrey, can you just, I'm sorry, Jeffrey, can you just state who voted for it?
Yes,
for the listener?
Yes, Alderman Scott Childress, Alderman Tallerman, and myself, Alderman Morrell, voted in favor of the amendment. And opposed were Alderwoman Worthington and Alderman O'Reilly. So now we move on. Now we go back to the question of how do we proceed on the legislation. So I believe Alderman Scott Childress was proposing tabling.
Well, I'm sorry. It wouldn't actually be tabling. It would be putting it back to old business because we haven't voted on it in order to table it, I believe.
It'd be postponing it.
Okay.
Postponing the vote.
Okay.
Hey, Jeffrey, can I just say one more thing before we go to this?
Sure. Alderman O'Reilly.
You know, Don sat there and just came up with a number, 150 feet. There's no reason or rhyme for that 150 unless he has one. I mean, where did that come from? He just said, 150 feet sounds good, and you guys say yes? I don't get it. Thank you.
Yes, Alderman Scott Childress.
The reason for voting on that, Patrick, was just to move on to the main legislation. If we're going to send it back for further research, that's one of the things that would be subject to thinking. So I could have voted for it or against it. It didn't matter to me. The point was just to move on from the amendment vote to move on to the substantive vote on the proposed legislation.
I was on the exact same page. Yes.
Sorry, Jeffrey.
Sorry.
So you can decide to postpone the vote, talk about this another month, bring it back, or somebody can make a motion on this and you could vote for this tonight with the amendment of 100 feet versus the 500 feet. Just wanted to clarify the options that are
Yes.
here.
Right, and I believe we already had a motion on the table. So Alderman Tallerman, do you want to proceed with that motion, or do you want to withdraw and do further research?
It would have to be a new motion just because the motion was made before the amendment.
Oh, okay. So we have a proposal to, and I'm in favor of looking. It seems like this needs to be discussed a little bit more from what I'm hearing. So I would be in favor of postponing.
Agreed. Let's postpone and look at it next month.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So moving right along, we are coming to the finish line, and I apologize for everybody I know a lot of people that are listening are probably just waiting for this one vote. We have the policing proposal, police commission proposal, and I will let. This is something that was worked on through the police special policing committee, which Alderwoman Worthington chairs. So I will let her take the floor. Rita, you're muted.
Sorry, you would think I would know too by now. Yeah, so thank you very much. So yeah, the police committee, which is myself and Tora Morel and Majority Leader Scott Childress, we really have been working on this for some time, and it seems like it's been all consuming. So as you know, the current climate is once again put this on. It's Ahmaud Arbery and most recently Rayshard Brooks. We find ourselves at the height of tensions between police and community once again. So you have before you, and I'm hoping that all of the council members receive the resolution that we want to put forth. It is a resolution which lays out guidelines and procedures for the City of Kingston Police Commission. The document has been prepared after discussions with community organizations, those organizations being Rise Up Kingston, as well as other community leaders. Discussion has also been held with members of the Police Commission. Attorneys for Rise Up Kingston, as well as our attorneys for the city, have held discussions. And so what we put forth, we feel is a first step in a long process of making sure our residents feel safe. You know, we also understand that law enforcement is necessary for public safety reasons, but we also want to make sure that our police officers are held to the highest standard of conduct, which hopefully will in turn produce a better outcome and strengthen the divide that exists now between community and police. And so the resolution that you have before you, I'm hoping that you take a look at it and that you agree with most of it, or with, if not all of it. And if you have any questions, you can direct those questions to the 3 members of this policing subcommittee.
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Alderwoman Worthington, for your leadership in this matter. It has been probably the highlight of my year to work alongside you on this. And also with Alderman Scott Childress, his input has been invaluable throughout this entire process, and I'm very happy with what we have before us. And as you said, as Alderwoman Worthington said, this is just a small first step in a long process that will. We were discussing earlier today charter revisions, for example, and I'm hoping that this is that we can address the bigger picture through that process. So I'm happy to. A step in the right direction is still a step in the right direction. So I'm happy to support this. Yes, Alderwoman Worthington.
I too want to offer my thanks to both yourself and to Alderman Scott Childress. You know, just for the input and the way that you all have both helped guide me along in this process. You know, being an African American woman doing this is not the greatest right now. It is a horrible time in our country right now to see this divide happening. And this issue, unfortunately, has kept me up at night. And so being that, you know, again, this is a first step, a small step in moving in the right direction to a longer step.
Alderman Scott Childress.
Well, I would like to join in the thanks also. Rita Worthington, your leadership has been stellar. I'm looking back at the speech that you made Wednesday, but I think it was 2 weeks ago. Wonderfully powerful, really moving speech that you gave. And I think too, Alderman Ventura Morel, your work here has been wonderful, steady, and committed the whole way through. When we started this process about 2.5 years ago, we cast a wide net looking at the ways that police commissions worked in different parts of the country. We looked at different ways that they might investigate police offices. So we met, as Rita noted, with lots of different people. We also met with Jerry Benjamin of the Benjamin Center, one of the experts of New York State law, and as well as other legal scholars, political scientists. And so as we zeroed in with members of the community on the Rochester law, we worked very hard to bring that into the form that would work for Kingston. And I think that's where we are now. So I'm excited to support this legislation, and I hope everyone else does. I see it as pretty much common sense at this point, something that's much clearer than it was before, something that really works to create within the current confines that we have set up by our city charter. That's going to help to make the police commission more representative of the diversity, the wonderful, rich diversity of Kingston. We're very excited that the mayor has recently appointed Minya DeJeanette to the police commission. There was an empty seat. She's now there. And we are also excited that we've been able to pass legislation providing money for some of the training that's discussed in this particular piece of legislation. Our current police department receives lots of training. As a matter of fact, is trained far above what most other police departments receive. Bias training and race and sex training, bias training. And we think it's only fair that the police commission match that level, if not exceed that level of training. And those are the sorts of things that we're committed to, that we believe the mayor is committed to, and we believe too that the current police commission is committed to these things. So I think everybody's on the same page here, and we're ready to move forward with this. So I do have to note there's one little change that we need to take out, if I may. There's a parenthetical remark on page 4 about a meeting that could potentially take place via video call. This parenthetical remark, I don't know if we have to do this. This is a question for Dan. I don't know if we have to do this via an amendment or if we can silently take it out before we make the motion here. I believe there's also an issue of amending that this version might have to be offered as an amendment to the legislation or the item that's now on our agenda. So 2 process questions there for Dan Gartenstein.
You can basically cross it out, and the committee report can just reflect that you're adopting the resolution attached herewith.
Okay.
And then prior to caucus, the version will be corrected, and when you vote on it or when you discuss it at caucus, you'll have the corrected version.
Thank you. There's also the question of whether we have to produce this as an amendment to the version that is on our agenda.
No, there's no requirement that anything be posted with regard to the agenda. You have an item on your agenda. You are passing a resolution. You're attaching the document that you're voting on. That's more than sufficient.
Thank you.
And I believe the resolution we are looking at is already on the agenda as of this afternoon. Okay, so I have a committee report here. Resolution to adopt guidelines.
Alderman Coop has something to say. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Alderman Coop, yes.
Okay, thank you. I also applaud the work that's been done in the preparation of this. I do have a comment and a clarification that I would request related to page 2, paragraph D, powers and duties. First of all, the police commissioners serve at a no salary. Is that correct? Right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, no salary. I look at that paragraph, orientation and ongoing training of the commission and the staff shall endeavor to include, but not be limited to, and then there are 12 specific items, any one of which you could probably get a bachelor's degree at a university. I think that's going to scare a lot of people off. I think you're asking a lot of training, and a lot of them have some of the 12 items. Some of them have multiple issues. The training is just, I just can't believe it. So I think maybe that could be consolidated someday. Just a suggestion. I'm supportive of what is done, but that if I were considering to go on a police commission, I'd look at that and says, "Oh my God, I'm never going to be home. I'm always going to be in training somewhere." So just an observation. Thank you.
Alderman Scott Childress.
Yes, Doug, I recognize what you're saying. If we required all that training, yes, that would be a full-time job. But the crucial phrase there is endeavor to include. So this is we're asking for a good faith effort. Some of these things they should already be doing, in their bylaws, numbers 1 and 7, and probably 8 Those things are probably already covered. A number of these other things would be could be part of the same training. And so I understand what you're saying, but we just want to make it clear that there's a lot of diversity in our community, and to the furthest extent possible, we want people on the police commission who are sensitive to those differences and who can really pay attention to the various experiences that people would bring into the process of any complaint that's offered.
Yes, Alderman O'Reilly.
Alderman O'Reilly here. I just want to thank you three for your hard work on this matter, and truly appreciated by everybody in this town right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so unless anybody else has anything else to add on the question, I will read the committee report. Okay, so I have here resolution to adopt guidelines and practices for the police accountability process and community representativeness of the Kingston, New York Police Commission as per attached. Is there a motion? Motion by Ronnie Scott Childress, second by Rita Worthington. All in favor? Don, how are you voting? Don Tallerman, I can't see you on the screen.
Here we go.
Okay, that is 5 in favor, opposed 0. So the motion is adopted. Thank you all for your hard work. I know this has been a very long and well overdue process, and I'm happy to live in a city where something like this can pass this committee unanimously. So thank you all. Anything else on before I call for a motion to adjourn? Anything else to add? Okay, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Patrick O'Reilly, second. Bernie Scott Childress, all in favor? Oh, Dan Garnstein has something to add?
That was good night.
Okay, good night.
Sign off.
Thank you, Dan. All in favor? Good night, everyone. Go have something.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Andrea, for running the show.
Yes, thank you, Andrea, as always.
Anytime. They have it tomorrow night.
Good night.
This